Hello, everyone. And I see that people are still joining. So let's give everyone a couple of minutes more to join and then we can start. In the meantime, for those of you joining in for the first time, this is our third Spaces discussion on the Mahabharata. And specifically, we decided to start off with Karn, who is one of the most fascinating characters in the epic, and also about whom there have been a lot of myths and misconceptions that have grown, and there is almost what I would call a cult of fandom that has grown around him. And we thought it would be it would be good to start off with with this topic. And one other decision that we took, and when I say we, I'm talking about a group of us who are interested in the Mahabharata. Some of us are also authors in their own, including two of the speakers and several of the other people who have joined. They have authored books. They have contributed to books on the Mahabharata. So I thought, what better group of people to talk about the Mahabharata and Karn than them. So in the first couple of spaces discussions that we had, we took a look at some of the sort of what I would say myths around Karn, that he was a great warrior. And Deepak, for instance, enumerated the number of times in the Mahabharata war itself before at Virat and other places that he took up arms and lost, or in some cases he even ran away from the battlefield. This is, not to diminish the fact that Karn was a great warrior, but the Mahabharata that we read paints a very nuanced and a gray picture, not black and white, of Karn. And the same is probably true of most of the principal characters in the Mahabharata, right? It is very, I think, simplistic to portray them as good or evil or good or white or black and white. They have shades of gray, as did. Another decision that we took was that while there are any number of texts that we can reference on the Mahabharata, we decided to exclude a few specific. Said we are not going to go by any modern retellings. We are not going to go by any fictional adaptations that have proliferated in the market and all, because when we are talking of demythifying the character, we have to go back to the source itself, and that is the Vyasa Mahabharata. And specifically within the Vyasa Mahabharata, we could have picked up the Gita Press translation, or one of the southern recensions, the Kumbakonam edition, recension, and so on. But we, for a variety of reasons, we said, let us stick with the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute's critical edition, which is generally accepted as a very, very scholarly work that went through hundreds of Mahabharata manuscripts, including every major recension that is that we have heard of. And from there, they constituted the critical edition of the text. So that we said, let us use that as the baseline. If there is any question, doubt, a topic that needs clarification, we will use that as the reference. And the first two sessions they were recorded, they are available. So if you go to the tweet where I put out the notice about this third spaces, embedded or following that are two tweets with links to the recordings of the first two sessions. Even this one is being recorded. And once the recording is available, I will put out a tweet with the link. So without further ado, to use a phrase, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Rupa. And she is she has contributed a story to an anthology on the Mahabharata that was published by Bloomsbury. And Unsung Valor, Forgotten Tales or Unknown Tales from the Kurukshetra War. It is available as a paperback and as a Kindle edition. So I would strongly encourage you to go get a copy. If you want to try it, you can download a Kindle sample. You can try it out, and then you can purchase the book. It's a fabulous. It would make for a fabulous addition to your library at home. And Rupal is going to talk of the myth of Karn having all the qualities of the Pandavas, right? So, Yudhishthir and Bhim and Arjun and Nakul and Sahadev and whatever qualities they were most attributed with, people have built this myth that Karn did all five of those qualities. And unfortunately, if you go to places like Quora and others, the amount of misinformation that is spread with glee by people is not even funny. So, Rupal, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. Hello, everyone. The popular myth that Karn had the qualities of all the five Pandavas combined stems from one of the stories that tried to explain Draupadi's polyandry, that she asked for a husband with five or, in some cases, 14 qualities. In the Mahabharata, the boon referred to and granted by Lord Shiva is that she asked for a husband 5 times. It makes no mention of the number of desired qualities or even any quality. But believing the number of qualities story, people decided that since no one man could possibly have all the qualities a woman might want, it makes sense that these attributes were divided amongst the five brothers. And with time, as myths surrounding Karn grew, people pounced upon the story to claim that Karn, being the eldest brother, had all the qualities in him. This was done to raise his stature, basically, to the position of a legitimate contender of the hero of the epic. With every retelling making stranger and stranger claims, the only thorn remaining seemed to be the fact that the heroine of the epic, Krishna Draupadi, was the wife of his foes and remained unavailable to him. There was also the matter of Shiva's boon. So it was sort of brought together by making up a story that Karn had all the qualities that Draupadi had asked of Shiva in her previous birth, and he was the ideal man for her. Now, Amrita will deal with the stories linking the two of them and how it came about, so I don't want to dwell on that. But what I want to talk about is how similar Karn was to his brothers by birth and whether he indeed shared qualities with them. So, first, let's take Yudhishthir. This should also address a request by a listener in our last discussion, by the way. So, now all of us know of Yudhishthir's image of a Dharmaraj, and we all know that his speaking the truth was one of his qualities. But what we don't realize is that it's easy to speak the truth and do the right thing when there is little to no personal cost involved for us. But when it's a matter of choosing between the ones we love and righteousness, or the choices between a comfortable and worry free life for us and doing the right thing, how many of us would still choose to do the right thing? How many of us aspiring to be rich or even to have a secure financial future would refuse a sudden windfall, even if it came with a few strings attached? It is our greed, our fear, our attachment that makes us choose the wrong over the right. We have to view Yudhishthir in that light. He always chose to do what he should over what was easy, despite the personal cost involved. His decision to play with youth is a topic of its own, and I will touch upon it some other time. But I will stress that after that, he fully owned his mistake. He was asked many times by his friends and allies to consider 12 months for 12 years and to end his exile early. His allies were ready to fight under him and retake what was lost at the youth the moment he gave the signal. He had a lot of power at his disposal and a lot of friends because he had been accepted as the emperor of Aryavart. Most of the kingdoms would have fought under him at that time, at the beginning. Because what happened at Dyut, particularly Krishna Draupadi's humiliation, would have been fresh in people's minds, and almost everyone would have supported him over Duryodhan. But he chose to honor the conditions of the second game. He chose 12 years of hardship for himself and his family, plus 1 year of servitude. He underwent remorse every single one of those days of those years when he saw his younger brothers facing difficulties because of his actions. He lamented every time Draupadi faced difficulties, knowing all the time that he was responsible for it, with the knowledge that he could end it all only if he compromised with personal integrity and principles, if he decided to choose the easy over the right. And despite living with this knowledge every day, he consistently chose to do the right thing. And it's not only in this instance. Yudhishthira is called Dharmraj because he always exhibited this quality to choose above personal greed or fear. Now we compare this to Karn. Karn was fully aware at every point of his life that what Duryodhan was doing to the Pandavas was wrong, be it the many conspiracies to kill Bhim, or the plot to burn the five brothers and Kunti alive while they were sleeping, or the conspiracy of Dyut to rob them of their kingdom and hard-earned prosperity, or any other hundreds of things that he did. But he never opposed him. In fact, he actively participated in many of them, even made the plans for some of them. He would say the exact thing that Duryodhan wanted to hear. Even when Shakuni or Dushasan failed to do or say the thing that Duryodhan most wanted, Karn would always do it. That's why he earned the title of the trunk of the tree of passion, because he was Duryodhan's enabler. And he did it because he benefited from it. He was a king because Duryodhan made him one. Doing what he should instead of what was easy would have made him lose all those privileges, that easy life, the prosperity, the royal status. So to live an easy life, he consistently chose to do the wrong thing. Contrasted to Yudhishthir, who gave up an empire to keep his promise. Karn even admitted as such to Krishna in Bhatyan Parv, when Krishna went to Hastinapur as a peace envoy. He admitted that he did what he shouldn't have for Duryodhan. He admitted his own role during Dyut of further fanning the enmity between the cousins by his words. But did he choose to do anything to correct his mistake? No. Did he go to Duryodhan before the war was announced and say that he wouldn't fight, or that Duryodhan should try for peace with his cousin? No. His remorse was just empty words, backed by no action whatsoever. Contrasted to Yudhishthir, who lived his remorse. So the claim that Karn had the most important quality of Yudhishthir, I think, is a complete myth. Now, let's come to Bhim. We tend to forget the most important quality of Bhim in the face of his physical strength or his ability to eat more than anyone. But Bhim's most important quality is his being the protector of the family, a duty he took very seriously. He always protected his family, since Yudhishthir, despite being older, was unable to do in the most physical sense. Be it protecting his brothers from the 100 brothers in childhood, carrying everyone on his body after the Lakshagriha, or marrying Hidimba, a woman he didn't initially want, to make sure that his family got her clan's protection. He never shied away from doing what should be done. Kunti even sent him to Bakasur to protect the family that had given them refuge. And that's why Draupadi's humiliation appeared to hurt and anger him the most, because he took it as a personal failure to do what he believed was his duty, protection. He regarded Draupadi's humiliation as a personal failure. And whenever Draupadi was under attack after that, he made sure never to repeat the mistake of Tirth. He killed Jatasur, who had abducted Draupadi and his three brothers. He tore through Jayadratha's army when he abducted her and was about to kill him when Arjun stopped him. Killed Kichak, even though Yudhishthira didn't want to risk being discovered during the Agyatvas. He then went on to kill even the sons and grandsons of Kichak when they tried to burn Draupadi as revenge. He killed all of Duryodhana's brothers and Duryodhana himself, no matter how it would tarnish his reputation as a warrior, because he had to break that thigh that had embarrassed his wife, and he had to rip off those hands that had touched her hair. And these things were far more important to him than his reputation as a warrior. Contrasted to Karna, he failed to protect Duryodhana and his women during Ghosh Yatra, where he fled the battle to save himself from the Gandharvas, leaving Duryodhana and his women behind. He failed to protect his own brother when Arjun killed him in Virat War, right in front of his eyes. He not only failed to protect any of the brothers of Duryodhana in the Kurukshetra war, but 31 of them died protecting him from Bhim. Bhim ripped open Dushasana right in front of him. Arjun killed his eldest son and heir, Vrishsen, right in front of him, and after challenging him to save him if he could. So protecting those whom he should be protecting was not a strong point with Karna. He valued himself far more than this quality of protection. However, he did share some of the qualities with Bhim. I personally think he's the closest in resemblance to Bhim amongst all. He was physically strong enough to be compared to a bull and win the epithet of Vrisha, the bull. Like Bhim, he was quick to anger. Both were quite decisive and men of action. Like Bhim, he was fairly aggressive and what we would call an alpha male. But he took it to the point of toxic masculinity. Bhim's aggression was held in check by a calm Yudhishthira and a more balanced and liberal Arjun. So, saying that Karna shared any quality of Bhim that actually mattered is again a myth. Now, moving on to Arjun. Arjun was many things. He has been hailed as Nar, the eternal companion of Narayan, and Ansh avatar of Vishnu. In some manuscripts of the northern recension and in southern recension, Arjun is hailed as a part of Vishnu himself, while his four brothers are the four arms of Vishnu, holding the conch, the discus, the mace, etc. So obviously Arjun is a veritable mine of qualities in Mahabharata. He is very balanced, very liberal, very respectful, very likable, very brave, and a lot of other very, very things. Krishna even mentions that there's hardly any difference between the two. Arjun exhibits the most desired qualities that make up a man: the courage, humility, wisdom, intelligence, and all that. But still, one of the most outstanding qualities of Arjun is his focus. It's mentioned again and again throughout the epic that he had gained control over his senses. There's a whole parva dedicated to his penance to Shiva. This concentration was so intense that the heat of his tapa started causing discomfort to the other denizens of the mountain forest. Then there is his lifetime of learning from different gurus and his perseverance. He kept learning, kept practicing till he gained mastery. Apart from the Brahmashira that was granted to him by Drona and the Gandiv granted by Agni and Varun before Khandavta, every other divine weapon came to him with his own hard work, his stature as Indra's son notwithstanding. Indra loved him for it, no doubt, and he was immensely proud of him, but he had also set the test of pleasing Lord Shiva first, before he or any other Devta gave him their weapons. Contrasted to Karna. He received the same celestial weapons as Arjun while studying under Drona. But the moment he achieved his Brahmastra from Parshuram, he gave up learning. He was a very good archer, but he never practiced enough to hone his archery to the level of an art form. He never persevered in a battle to see it through. The moment he thought it wasn't going his way, he simply gave up, like he did during the Swayamvar of Draupadi, when he was fighting Arjun disguised as a Brahmin, or during Ghosh Yatra when he left Duryodhan to the mercy of the Gandharvas. He had ample physical strength, stamina, talent at archery, and yet he was never hailed as the best warrior, despite being included amongst the best. Even his aim or obsession of besting Arjun wasn't strong enough to spur him to action, to improve himself. Even Duryodhan, in his obsession to beat Bhim, had practiced with the metal statue of Bhim for 13 years. Karn didn't do anything, even though he would get riled up whenever anyone praised Arjun in his hearing. His aim was to be better than Arjun. Even that wasn't enough to induce him to work on his focus or gain new weapons. He gave everything he had in his showdown with Arjun on the 17th day of the war. But it wasn't enough. Before he died, Arjun had destroyed his specially selected army, had made him exhaust all his weapons, had broken his armor and managed to pierce his vital organs, cut down his flag and everything. If you see the description of the battle, it reads like, and it makes you feel that if he had been more of a hard-working man, more focused, just had worked more and acquired more weapons, had put in more practice, just done something more, it would have been more of an equal fight. He had a few chances, no denying it. But some he lost in his arrogance and some just weren't good enough. He just fell short of where he needed to be in every department. And this from a man who spent a lifetime obsessing over Arjun. In my opinion, that's like really lazy. For other qualities of Arjun, he was never a liberal or progressive man like Arjun. He was quite the conservative with very fixed ideas about what a woman is good for. Tragically, his views on women and womanhood are some of the very worst in a very testosterone-loaded epic, and that's saying something. Unlike Arjun, he wasn't a very likable man either outside Duryodhan's immediate circle. He wasn't respectful to elders either, unless it suited his purpose. Where Arjun was secure and comfortable enough to carry off the role of the third gender with aplomb, Karn would flare up in anger at every real and imagined slight. So while he was a very good and a very formidable warrior, he didn't share any of Arjun's core character traits. Now, expecting him to share any qualities with Nakul or Sahadev is a bit of a stretch because they were not even biologically related. But still, for the sake of argument, Karn didn't have the calm, the dutiful, the wise qualities of the twins. There's nothing in the text to say that he was a skilled healer like them, or even knew enough about animal husbandry as to increase the animal wealth of his kingdom, or even of Hastinapur. So, to sum up, Karn might have been a little similar to some of the traits exhibited by Kunti's sons. After all, they were related by blood, but not enough to claim that he possessed their qualities that would be asked by a woman as a boon from Lord Shiva. He had his own qualities and character traits, and there were many. But to claim that he was somehow the sum total of all the five Pandavas, a complete man, in other words, is nothing but a myth with absolutely no substance to it. And if anyone has any questions or wants to add anything to it, I welcome them to do so.
Thank you, Rupal, so much for sharing that very, very detailed and I think very articulate there. So, folks, if you have questions, there are two ways in which you can ask them. One is if you can use Twitter to send it the Ask Mahabharat hashtag, or if you have a question, you can ask to be made a speaker, and I will do so, and you can go ahead and ask your question. In the meantime, then if we don't have any other questions, Pranshu,
Yeah.
please.
So I just want, yeah. So just like wanted to like specifically, that Rupal did point out that he was not related to the other two brothers. So there is a shlok which is there in the Kumkonam edition also, in the Hindi Northern edition also, and it's also in the MBTN. Is Dhriti Shama Damostate Shoch Mindriya Nigrahe Dhi Vidya Satyam Krodho Dashak Dharam Lakshanam. The 10 qualities, characteristics of what a dharma is. And then, because you see, it's like Triyartho Veda, and especially Madhavacharya used to just, overload his shlokas with multiple meanings. So these translate 5 ways, and they say basically Bhim, it means fortitude, forgiveness, self-control, punish the guilty. Oh, sorry, that's Yudhishthir. Punish the guilty, I'm going by the alphabetic, with the order of the birth. Punish the guilty, purity of mind, faculty of sense, reflection, knowledge, truthful, free of anger. In Bhim's case, it is courage, forbearance, ability to overpower, understanding one's flaws, and introspection, which actually doesn't come across much, clearness of purpose, control of senses, understanding, learning, sincere. Then Arjun's is satisfaction, competence, subdue, self-restraint, integrity, virile power, intelligence, scholarship, virtuous and honest, and suppressed anger. So all these three are the Kontes. It changes a little for the Madres. Resolute, capable, tranquilize or tame enemies, identify boundaries, cleanliness, premonation, imagination, knowledge and control over dogma and tranquil. This is Sahadev. But Nakul stands out differently. It is satisfaction, competence, endurance, self-command, domesticate, heal, honesty, attraction, meditation, science, control of id, effectual and potent. And that's where he basically, when he asks you which brother you want to revive. So Kunti and Madri are avatars of goddess Siddhi and goddess Dhriti. So Kunti is goddess Siddhi, the goddess of perfection, success. And goddess Dhriti is born as the goddess of understanding, courage and resolution. And all the Purans said if Devi Dhriti ceases to exist in the whole world will become timid and cowardly. So once Dhriti, and that's basically why Yudhishthir asked Nakul should be the one alive, because as long as one son of Devi Dhriti is alive, the that will be sufficient for dharma. The world will not become timid and cowardly. So this is where Rupal also brought out very well. The sons of Dhriti or Madri had a totally different set of qualities, which obviously Karna will not have.
Thank you. Thank you, Pranshu. That is fascinating. I think I learned something new today, which is why I look forward to hosting this Spaces discussion, because I get to learn something new about the Mahabharata every time. So thanks, Pranshu. So one note before this up for questions is that, folks, while there are literally uncountable number of things that we can talk and discuss about the Mahabharata, this Spaces is specifically related to the topic of Karna, and we all have lots and lots of opinions about Karna. The purpose here is not to establish a particular point of view, but to basically go by what the epic says and use that to correct some of the myths or misconceptions about Karna. So I see that Gaurav Kumar Pandey has asked to Gaurav, I have made you a speaker, so you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. Gaurav, you're a speaker now. You can go ahead and ask your question. Okay, we can come back to Gaurav later on. I'll now invite Amrita Talukdar. She is also an author of the anthology Unsung Valor. So she's going to talk about, I think, what is one of the most pernicious myths about Karna in the Mahabharata, which is that Draupadi, for some reasons, harbored a secret for a romance and unrequited love for Karan, which continued right up till her his very death. And there have been even books written about it. A few decades ago to about 10 years back and so on. And while the books themselves may be of very high literary, quality, but I think they do injustice to the Mahabharata, to Karn, to Draupadi by perpetuating this myth that Draupadi harbored any notion of any romance for Karn. So Amrita, please tell us why we should not believe any of that.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Abhinav, and thanks, Rupal, for that wonderful speech, as well as Pranshu. So, yeah, as you said, that today I'll be talking about perhaps the most controversial part of this entire topic on Karn, something that has been plaguing social media and literature, and even cinema nowadays. For example, recently I just came across one very well-made movie on Karn, and there it's a modern day tale on Karn, and his girlfriend was named Draupadi. So yeah, there's quite a few stuff here. So I'm going to divide my entire this thing into two parts basically. First is I'll talk about what Vyasa says, and since this thing basically is not there in Vyasa's Mahabharata, so I'm going to have to talk a little bit about the source that comes from the folklore. Okay, so I'll just go back a little in time. This is just to set the context. Okay, this was back in 2013 when I had begun to take interest in the epic. So I was Googling and I came across certain blog articles that spoke about a certain secret of Draupadi, like unknown secret, something that nobody knows. So I was intrigued and I went to the blogs and just clicked and read the story. And it goes something like this: that the Pandavas, during their exile, they came across a certain tree whose fruit they had plucked unlawfully that was meant for some other rishi. Variations here. There's in some version it's mango, in some version it's jambu. There are variations there, but the gist is more or less the same, and they get scared that the rishi might curse them. So Krishna comes to their rescue, and he tells them that each one of you speaks some truth, then the fruit would attach itself back to the tree. In some version, it is the fruit will ripen itself if you speak truth. So now, one by one, the 5 Pandavas, they start speaking, and the fruit gets ripened, and slowly it is, and at last it is Draupadi's turn. Now, when she is made to speak, then Draupadi says she is the biggest pativrata out there, and etc., etc. And the moment she starts talking, the fruit falls down on the ground. So Arjun and Bhim start scolding her, and then Krishna intervenes and says, "Okay, Draupadi, you say the truth. Whatever is there in your heart, you say it." And then Draupadi feels ashamed, and she confesses that she loves Karn. Okay, in some version, it says that she desired a 6th husband, and that is Karn. And the moment she says that, the fruit attaches itself to the branch. Now, when I saw the story for the first time, I was sold, because even though my personal preference was Draupadi Arjun pairing, but then Karn is a tragic hero, at least he's perceived as one. He's a tragic heroine, so that way, I mean, they could make an interesting pair. But 1 year later, when I started reading the unabridged Mahabharata, naturally I wanted to know where that scene is, and man was I fooled. I realized that throughout the epic, Karn and Draupadi don't have a single proper interaction, let alone love. So, with that, I'd first go to what the text states about Karn Draupadi interaction here. And I'll go by the critical edition. So, in Vyasa's Mahabharata, Draupadi and Karn have 2 major scenes together. Okay. First is the Swayamvar, and the other is the dice game. And in none of them do they have any healthy conversation that could blossom into love later on. Now, in Swayamvar, there is some inconsistency. That is, popularly, we know that Draupadi had rejected Karn on account of his birth. However, in Bodhi, the Bodhi scholars, the general editor Vishnu Suktankar, who had edited the critical edition, the Adi Parva of the critical edition, he had found out that the rejection sequence appears only in the newer and fewer manuscripts, and the older manuscripts do not have it. But that's a different topic. Maybe we'll have a different session on that. But the conclusion is that on this day there is no sign of love anywhere. The second interaction that happens is in the dice game, where we all know that Draupadi is staked and dragged and Karn abuses her verbally. He calls her a loose woman and orders the Shasan to disrobe her. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop there, because that's where the TV serials stop. But Karn in Vyasa's Mahabharata said a lot more than that. He constantly Shasan to take her inside. And by inside, Karn is basically talking about the slave quarters. So he also adds there that there is nothing wrong if a slave has intimacy with her master. So she can choose another man, since the Pandavas are now slaves. And though Duryodhan silently approves of all that is being said, this is something that is quite noteworthy, that he himself, the much vilified Duryodhan himself, never talks like that with Draupadi ever, the way Karn does in this particular incident, although the popular narrations and renditions would have us believe otherwise. Now, known interactions of Karn and Draupadi in the epic. Now, why I emphasize on the number of interactions here is because, firstly, Karn and Draupadi, they lived miles apart. Okay. And we have to remember that this was an era when there was no WhatsApp, no Facebook, no internet, where people could converse. There were no cars or trains where they could easily travel. On top of that, there were certain restrictions in the interaction between men and women, at least in the Kuru family, who were pretty conservative, opposed to the Yadavas. In other words, Karn and Draupadi probably met only on 2 or 3 occasions in their entire life. Another could be the Ratsya Yagya, although Vyasa does not mention any specific meeting between them at that point. Not to mention their age gap. Now, interestingly, it is only after... Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. So, interestingly, it is only after the dice game that Draupadi speaks about Karn for the first time in the whole epic. It happens during exile, when she recalls the incident and his behavior with disgust. Now, at this point, one might believe that Draupadi must have hated him to the core, fuming at him. Of course, she must have been very angry with him. But to be very frank, she remains very, very indifferent to Karn throughout the text. In fact, throughout Mahabharata, she barely talks about Karn. And her main anger is directed at Duryodhan. Because Duryodhan, at the end of the day, is the main decision maker. He's the king. Rest are all his sidekicks. So, Karn, on the other hand, he does refer to Draupadi quite a few times. Mostly in mockery when he's talking to Duryodhan. Once after her Swayamvar, another time after dice game. So, if at all any angst was there, which Vyasa didn't explicitly mention, it was probably from Karn's side and not the other way around. Yet in modern renditions, it is Draupadi who is shown to be hopelessly in love with him. But if we come to think of it, it makes no sense after what happened at the dice game. So, hearing all this, a plausible question might arise that if Vyasa didn't say anything like that, then how come this story came? I mean, from where did it come? So at this point, it is not easy to trace the exact source, but I think I can come up with some answers here. So, Mahabharat as a tradition, it basically comes from three major sources: Sanskrit text plus the Purans. All Purans have Mahabharat stories in bits and pieces. Most of them have. So I'm clubbing them all of them into one, which is in Sanskrit. Then the regional retellings, and third is the folk culture. Now, the common masses and peasants, they did not have as much expertise over the text, as the erudite pundits and scholars. So, as a result, from 9th to 10th century, or perhaps even, we find that there were several writers, court poets, etc., who began to retell the story in their own mother tongue for a wider audience. And maybe there were some like Nanya Bhatta who remained true to the canon, but in most cases, these retellers, they took generous creative liberties to make the story more appealing to the wider masses, or sometimes to even appease their patron kings. So one such retelling is the 14th century Villi Bharatam by Villi Puttur Alvar. And this is one of the earliest known versions where we come across this fruit story. Now here, the fruit is not mango or jamun, it is gooseberry or amla. Okay. And here, Draupadi's confession is not that she loves Karna. She just says that she longs for a sixth husband. That's it. No mention of Karna here, nothing. Now, 1 century later, this same story, it travels to Orissa in the form of Saraladasa's retelling in Uriya Mahabharata. Now here, the fruit becomes mango, variation, but is similar. And here, Draupadi again confesses her secret. But here, the secret is that she loves Arjun the most. That's right, Arjun, not Karna. Okay. So here this particular version stays true, even though it's a creative liberty, it stays true to Vyasa's original, because where we know that Draupadi did love Arjun the most. Now in 17th century Bengal, the story travels yet again in the form of Kashiram Das's retelling. And here we see that Draupadi says that I want a sixth husband and I love Karna. And I want Karna as the sixth husband. So you see that from the 14th century to the 17th century, how the story changed. In Tamil Nadu, she said 14th century, I just want a sixth husband. In 15th century Orissa, she said I love Arjun the most. In 17th century Bengal, she's saying I love Karna. So this is how basically the story evolved with time. And even Kashiram Das, he said in his preface that when he was writing his retelling, he had traveled across the country and collected folklore from various parts. So in Maharashtra also, there's a similar story called the Jambul Akhyan. Okay. Now here, this story is very similar, but here the fruit is not mango or amla or anything else. It is jamun, jambul or jamun, and this story is basically immortalized in the form of a play by a very famous late folklorist called Vitthal Umap in Gondhal folk music. And this is where we come to know that Draupadi loves Karna and she regrets not marrying him. And if she had, then she wouldn't have been disrobed or called a loose woman. Now, I'm not sure if the story was aware that it was Karna himself who did all this to her. But anyway, that's one source of this story. The second source here is the Bhil Mahabharata. Now, Bhil Mahabharata is not a cohesive story like Vyasa's Mahabharata. It's a collection of poems popular in the Dongri Hill region in West India, where an Adivasi ethnic group called the Bhils reside. So there's a gentleman named Bhagwan Das Patel who had spent years with them to study their Mahabharata tradition. And he published this in a book. And this is basically a collection of poems on disjointed incidents, some of which have no cultural similarity with Vyasa's version. There are no Kauravas, there's no exact description of war, nothing. So here, Draupadi is called, okay, she's not called Draupadi, she's called Thofa. And she's a fair woman with blonde hair, unlike the Draupadi that we know, who was Krishna, who was dark skinned with bluish black hair. So in this collection, there's a poem between Thofa and Vasang. Because Vasang is their version of Vasuki. So there, the gist of the story is that Vasuki, he falls for Draupadi and wants to ravish her. And Arjun, he cannot do anything, he fails to defeat him. So at first, Draupadi plays along, and but after some time, she realizes her mistake and makes him confess his weakness. And Vasang tells her that nobody can defeat her except Karan. So Kunti, on behalf of Thofa, asks Karan to help, and he comes and defeats Vasuki and sends him back to Patalok. This is the gist. Now, these are the two main sources of this entire Karn Draupadi angle that we see, that I knowledge from what I found out. Now, we have to understand that these stories, whether it was retellings or whether the folklore, they were created for a reason. In most cases, the intention was to make the story of Mahabharata reachable across various classes of the society. Because the simple peasantry may not understand the complicated philosophy of Vyas. The tribal folks of Garhwal Himalayas will not relate to some of the relationships in the epic, as their culture is very different. So in order to make this iconic story palatable for their intended audience, oral folklorists and retellers, they left out certain things and added their own local flavor and religious beliefs into their versions. For instance, the Bhils, they worship snakes. So for them, obviously, Vasuki, the king of snakes, is above everyone else. In other words, this whole folklorish thing is their own imaginative expression. And if you think it's beautiful in their own way, because it tries to teach philosophy that holds true for their culture. And in fact, that is the beauty of Mahabharata, that it gives.
Amrita, are you there? We can't hear you. We seem to have lost audio connection from Amrita, but so we'll wait till she comes back. But in the meantime, this is so fascinating, right? That while the Mahabharata, the Vyasa Mahabharata, has no mention at all of any kind of a romantic entanglement between Draupadi and Karn, but as we come to the 15th and 17th centuries, we start to see some of the local recensions, some folk tales that introduce this angle, which I think is a topic for another discussion in its own right. So in the meantime, I'll take a couple of questions. So Ramit had a question that, and he asks, given their background, is it really worth to compare Karn with other Pandavas? Isn't it better to look at Karn from his perspective and why he did what he did? And I think this is a very, very interesting question, Ramit, and I think you are online. So if you do want to add anything, please send in a speaker request. I'll make you speaker. And I think there are two. Well, I'll let others talk about it, but I'll say a couple of things here. The first one is that Karn's existence in the Mahabharata is twofold. One is what he did and where he came from, and trying to explain his actions based on the life and the events in his life, right? So his being cursed by the Brahman, or his interactions with Parshurama or with Bhishma, and all right. And the second is that so much in his life was of his interactions with the Pandavas themselves, whether it is at Draupadi's Swayamvar, where the Mahabharata tells us he could neither lift, or he could neither string the bow, let alone attempting a shot at the contraption, the fish contraption. He couldn't even string the bow. Or later on, when he was the first one and used the most abusive language against Draupadi. So a lot of his life's actions were driven by this sense of rage, his sense of envy, his sense of whatever you might call it, with respect to the. So yes, it is definitely useful and worthwhile to look at his life from his own perspective, but I think a lot can also be understood by examining his life and his decisions when he interacted with the Pandavas. So anyone wants to add to that? Rupal, do you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Abhinav. See, the thing is, we are not the ones doing the comparing of Karn with the Pandavas, because obviously they are different people. That is what I tried to say. That Karn had his own set of qualities. He is not to be compared or said that he was similar to the Pandavas or that he had all their qualities. That is what the myth is. The myth says that he had the qualities of all the five brothers, and he was the complete Pandava. He made the complete man. That is what the myth is, and that is what it is about. That they were very different, obviously. I mean, despite being related by blood, they had a completely different upbringing. They grew up with completely different set of values. Pandavas were guided by Kunti, and no matter what people think of her, she was one of the best mothers ever. A single woman, a widow, who was always surrounded by so many palace intrigues and conspiracies and plots to kill her sons and her. And the way she brought up Pandavas, the way she gave them the values at every point of life was really something. So obviously, Karn did not have that. He grew up without Kunti's guidance. So his set of values was very different from the Pandavas. And I do not compare them. It is the myth that, to build him up, that he is said to be more than the Pandavas put together, which is a myth. And that is what we were doing. It's obviously not a fair comparison. They were completely different people. So that is what I think. I mean, if it answers your question. If you have anything to add, please do.
Correct. This is this is definitely useful, and there's one. So Samir Patil, you have asked to speak, so I'm making you a speaker. Can you please go ahead and ask your question? Yes, Samir, you are a speaker now. You should be able to speak.
Hi, this is Samir here. So there are two related questions which I want to ask. One is, did Karna not try to reverse the curse which he got from Parshuram? And second is, like, the way Indra interjected and took away the Kavash Kundal, did Surya not try to intervene in any way to protect Karna? So these are two related questions.
So it's Pranshu here. So first question here is that the curse from the Parshuram was that at the moment you need your training the most, that training will fail you. So the idea behind it is that you continue to study, and that is what there is there in the stories of his brothers Yudhishthir and Arjun. There's this constant discussions, constant studying, constant learning process, Saraswati. And so one of the variations basically is that Draupadi is the future Saraswati. She is the future Vak, the goddess Vak itself. herself. So the idea here is Vyas is immediately telling you is that what's the solution to that is to continue the learning and to continue and always learn, always be open to learning, and that probably he did not indulge in for whatever reasons. The second part of your question is that about the Surya's intervention. Surya was the person who told Karn that who his brothers are. Surya was the person who identified Karn that who his family is, and why did he do that? He intervened all of a sudden in a middle-aged man's life and say, hey, you know, buddy, all your life you thought you were the son of Adhira, loving mother Radha, which I also again I believe, like, you know, he had a loving parents. There's no such thing as that, you know, he was deprived of any parental guidance or anything like that. And Surya but intervenes at one point where he realizes my son is going the wrong way. So Surya does tell him that he is there, and he just leaves the decision in the hands of Karn. Karn does not act on that. Now, as for the idea where you know he did acquire, where he did lose his Kavach and Kundal. So even before, when he had Kavach and Kundal, he lost a lot of battles. So it's not as if the Kavach and Kundal intervened in his ability to you know, withstand the enemy. That and another point which is again a myth basically is that he was the only one with the invulnerable armor. Drona himself had an invulnerable armor, and he trained all his students. So all ability to have invulnerable armor. So there is a sequence on the 14th day where Duryodhan challenges wearing an invulnerable armor, challenges Arjun, and you know Arjun keeps on shooting, and you know Duryodhan is not affected at all because he is wearing that Abhedya Kavach and Kundal. Abhedya Kavach. Kundal is a different story. So like Abhedya Kavach. So then Arjun shoots on tip of his arrows. He puts in small. He has already prepared this for such instance. He has on tip of his arrows. He puts in these small needles, and those needles hit between the only place on a human being's armor where there's space between the nail and the skin right below it, and he hits those needles right there, and because of his ability to aim so well, that he hit Duryodhan on that place, and Duryodhan runs away, you know, shaking his hands, basically, you know, runs away from the battlefield. So the vulnerability was never the question. Now Surya actually would not have intervened in that situation because in exchange for the armor, Karn got the Vasavi Shakti. So if Karn is ever in peril for his life, he can use the Vasavi Shakti. The only opponent in Karn's mind who can put him in peril was Arjun. So that Vasavi Shakti, he had the protection. Now the problem is that is in Karn's mind, and probably in Surya's mind also, emboldened by Karn's confidence. But Karn was defeated by everybody. Satyaki, Abhimanyu, Bhim several times. Even Yudhishthir actually on the 17th day, initially Yudhishthir basically hits him and he basically faints away. And then Yudhishthir leaves them alone because Arjun had taken the oath to kill Karn. The oath was taken on the day of the Dhyut. That actually put Karn's life in so much safety because Arjun had taken the oath to kill him. As long as he keeps on fighting the other brothers or any other warriors, he was safe that way. So that I think should answer the question why Surya did not need to intervene in that respect.
Thank you, Pranshu. That is very, very insightful again. There's one question that has come in from Twitter from Avinash Kumar. I will read the question out. He says, "Hi Abhinav, good evening. I have one question. I have seen on the televised version when Arjun was going to fight with Karn, Sri Krishna mentioned to him that Karn is better than him. Why did he say so? If you can please answer this, thanks a lot." So I asked him which TV version, I haven't seen a response yet. But see, I know that when the Gada Yudh happened between Duryodhan and Bhim, Krishna says that Bhim is stronger, but Duryodhan is more skilled, and in a battle between strength and skill, it is skill that is going to win. But with respect to Karn, I cannot off the top of my head recall if Krishna mentioned this specifically to Arjun before the battle, or during the call, that Karn is better than him. So if someone can shed any light on this, that'll be great.
In Mahabharata, in none of the versions that I have come across of the unabridged Mahabharata has Krishna said that, Karn is better. Like he did say once. Just before the war. It's like trying to hype up your warrior. He keeps saying that, like, so many times Krishna has said that Arjun is better than anyone. He can defeat the gods with Indra at their head if he wants to. And just once, right before their 17th day war, he says that Karn is maybe even better than you. But you can do it. So it's like hyping up your warrior. So it's like 100 places where he says Arjun is the best, and one place where he says Karn might even be better than you. Who knows? So it's that kind of a thing. There are several such things, not about Arjun and Karn, but about many things. Like later on, when Shalya becomes the commander of the Kaurava forces, he says that Shalya is the best warrior amongst the entire Kaurava forces, better than Karn also. So, I mean, what does that mean then? It's a psychological thing, hyping up the warriors that, your enemy is so much better. He might even be better than you. You're going to win. So it's that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I want to add something here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Yeah. So Mahabharata in general, if you first of all, we have to remember that it's a piece of poetry. It's a poem, epic poem, and there is a tendency, there's a trend throughout the text, and I think it is because it's a piece of poetry that there are tons of hyperboles and places where there are exaggerations. Everyone is called the best of their own. Like in Mahabharata, I don't think I've seen any woman who's not the most beautiful woman on the planet. Everybody is called the most beautiful. Everybody's called the more. Of course, there are some whose actions are described. The fact that they are more beautiful or more better warriors, that are described through action. But there is a trend throughout Mahabharata where almost every other warrior is hyped up, just before they are about to perform in the war. Like Rupal mentioned, there's Shalya, who is called the best. Apparently, Shalya, in one place, Karn says that Krishna is the creator. And the next line, he says that with Shalya as my charioteer, I will defeat Krishna and Arjun. I mean, how can you defeat the creator when, no matter, even if Shalya is the best charioteer, how can you defeat the creator himself? So that kind of hyperbole is there throughout the text of Mahabharata. That's
one thing I would talk about that hyperbole is also that it is actually being told by Rishi Vaishampayan around 90 years after the war has happened. His audience would include a lot of people who had ancestors and ancestresses who were part of that epic. So he is actually playing up a little bit to his audience also, telling, your honorable ancestor was the greatest warrior of them all. Your honorable ancestress was the most beautiful woman of them all. It's also the way the setting is there, right? It is again recounted later by Shruti, but we don't have Shruti's description, right? We have Vaishampayan's description. So Vaishampayan is basically focusing on some of it is basically focused on his audience itself.
That's very true, and one of the things about the Mahabharata is that while it says a lot, there is much, I believe, that can also be gleaned by reading between the lines, because in many instances the Mahabharata doesn't make a pronouncement that this was certainly good and this was certainly bad. You read the text, the full text, and you tend to kind of feeling that I had at times was I had a slight smile on my lips that, aha, okay, so Vyasa is sending out this message, except that he's not saying so openly. You have to read the text and then get the gist of what was trying to be conveyed, which I think is just something that adds to the allure of the epic. And
I would also like to add here that one of the myths is about that the story of chariots being pushed. It was in some televised serial. I've forgotten which one, but it is like this: that when Karn shoots his arrow, the chariot of Arjun gets pushed only by 1 or 2 feet. But when Arjun shoots his arrow, the chariot of Karn is like blown away. And but then Krishna still keeps pumping up for Karn that oh my God, he's so good and all that. I actually read an article about it a few days back, and it claimed to be from Mahabharat. And now in Mahabharat, there is absolutely nothing like this. Nothing, nowhere. I don't know how the story also came up. Like, it is ridiculous because if you think about it, if you think that Krishna is God, there is absolutely no way that another human being can move him or his chariot even a slightest bit of an inch if he doesn't want it to. So it's really ridiculous. I don't know how people even come up with that.
Yeah, physics
And like
also doesn't
Abhinav
work
said,
that way. Yeah, physics also doesn't work that way. The horses also
exactly.
need to also go back, and so it's actually physically impossible for such a thing. And again, it's not there in any of the versions.
There's also another story where Karn had given up his golden tooth after his death, after which only he got mukti. So
yes, please, can you also bust this myth? This is something that I'd read many or heard many years back, and it is so ludicrous and ridiculous. I'm not even sure how anyone can believe that, but please.
yeah, so see, we all know that Karn was beheaded by Anjalika weapon by Arjun in the epic. So the story goes like this, and there are various variations on that. It's not like there's one fixed version, but the gist is something like that: Karn was dying, but somehow his soul was not getting freed. So Krishna, in the form of a priest or I think or a monk, something like that, comes up at the battlefield and tells him that Karn has done so much punya that is why he's not able to free himself. His soul is not getting freed or something. So then he asks for a daan of his punya. Only then he can be freed from this mortal world. So Karn plucks out his golden tooth and hands it over to Krishna or the monk, and then he gets mukti. So I'm not sure. From what there is one Tamil, I think, play drama created long time back. I have to dig up a bit for the name, in which the story appears first. Like I was talking about, that most of these stories, they come up from later folklorists, not Vyasa's Mahabharata. Because just like nowadays we have novelists writing on Mahabharata, same thing has been happening for the last centuries. So it's not something new. We have Bhasha, who wrote on Duryodhan. There are so many others. So these stories are basically byproduct of basically a fertile imagination of these folklorists. But the problem is that a modern day reader, an average Indian, to an average Indian, there is no difference between Vyasa's Mahabharata and these later created stories, and that is what creates the confusion.
And I'll just comment something about the Vyasa's Mahabharata, the Vaishampayan's version, is 3,500 years old at least, right? And it was started being written down around 800 BC. Panini, right? So the thing is, I'll tell you a modern Hindi classic. Most of the largest population of Hindi language right now our national language is Khadi Boli Hindi. The largest language in 1870s was the Bhojpuri, the Eastern Hindi variant. There was a gentleman called Devki Nandan Khatri, and he wrote a book called Chandrakanta, and then later on Chandrakanta Santati. It became so popular, it actually popularized his version of Hindi, the Khadi Boli. Literally, our national language, we chose that as our national language. So imagine that, Bhojpuri would be the Bollywood, and the Bollywood would be the Bhojpuri variation of film industry right now. So having said that, Chandrakanta has been telecast like 6 or 7 times on the TV channels. None of the plays have got anything, none of the televised series have anything to do with the story of Chandrakanta, except that they just borrowed the names of the characters. So this is what has happened to a modern classic 125 years back, 133 years back, written by and the variations already people, because the characters are beloved, the characters become beloved. So the people, when they are writing about it, when they are showing it in TV serials, they're using the names, but they're using their own stories and variations. So
Exactly.
This is what happened for 100 years, 30 years back. Imagine what happened to something 3,500 years back, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I
And the gap is because people are not aware of what is exactly in Vyas Mahabharat. These depictions in popular culture, they have much more viewership today. They take their different takes on perspective. They explore the psyche of the characters. But while doing so, what people forget is that there's a lot of creative liberty involved. Just because a serial says that, Duryodhan was undergoing so much turmoil and he didn't really do this thing, it doesn't mean it's the same in Vyas Mahabharata. They are just doing that to make you interested in it. Just because they are showing one grey character as a very good one, or one bad character as a very good one, and one very good character as a bad one, doesn't really mean it was exactly like that in Vyas Mahabharata. You have to understand this is creative liberty. We need to learn to enjoy the story that we are reading for what it is, for its literary merit, but not to confuse it with the epic. That is the difference. We cannot expect that, when you read Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare wrote so many plays on historical characters. His Julius Caesar is not really the historical Julius Caesar. It is a very creative play based on Julius Caesar. We need to be
Yeah.
able to tell the difference. That is
So one
what
of his
people nowadays feel. This gap in learning.
And
one of
one,
his most favorite characters he created, Richard III, the Hunchback, was 8 years of age when he's depicted in the events of the day. But Shakespeare took that creative liberty, but he didn't mean it to be the historical truth, right? And but again, the point is that basically the merit of that thing basically colors the people's opinions across the centuries.
very true. And uh, I think there are, if you look at modern retellings or fictional retellings based on the Mahabharata, I think there are two things that take place. One is that there is an element of creative liberty and artistic license that is taken, that happens where you adapt certain incidents and you modify certain personality characters to to suit the story that you're telling. That is one part. But the other part that happens, which is more insidious, is that ideology colors the character's portrayal. And we have seen this happen time and again. And we do not have to get into this, we don't have the time. But I think one example that comes to mind is Iravati Karve's work on the Mahabharata. I think that is a really, really striking example of how ideology colored and poisoned the Mahabharata in her account. We'll take this separately, but there are actually quite a few people who have asked to speak. I'm going to make them speakers one by one. So please go ahead and ask your question. So, Bharat Narratives, I have made you a speaker. Can you please go ahead and ask your question? And others who are not talking, if you can mute your mics, that will help keep the noise, any background noise down. Okay, I'm making Jay Sharma a speaker. Can you please go ahead and ask your question? And I'm also making Advocate Himanshu Dahalia a speaker. So as you you become a speaker, can you please go ahead and ask your question? Yes, folks, if you're still, you sent in speaker requests, and I see that a couple of you have become speakers, can you please go ahead and ask your question? I'm making Rakesh Gupta and Tribhuvan also speakers, so please go ahead and ask your question. Yes, you are.
So one was a question that I had also posted on Twitter on the Sutam Navarayami verse that comes in certain editions, as Amritaji and Panshuji pointed. And I'd also like to add a point, if you permit, to what Amritaji spoke about on the golden teeth being donated, the folklore that comes around with that. So I think the tale of Krishna, Sri Krishna coming as the Brahmin and begging alms from Karna at the last dying moments comes first in the Villiputturar Bharatam, the Tamil Mahabharata. And I guess it's just opinion that this may be because of a prevalence in the southern lands, in Tamil Nadu specifically, legend of 7 philanthropical kings. Kodai Yer Vallal. There are 7 philanthropical kings who are praised and portrayed to even these days. So that might have influenced Villiputtura's writing, to portray Karna and his munificence, perceived munificence, something which we don't find in the Vyasa Bharata. He just takes the Vasavi Shakti instead of the Kavach Kundal. But this tradition of munificence and philanthropy in the Tamil culture might have influenced the portrayal of Karna in the Tamil Bharatam differently. So that's the point I wanted to add.
Oh, thank you. That
Yeah, and I know the time is running late, but even in a later session, if we can dwell on that Sutam Navarayami verse, I mean, does it appear, what is its relevance with respect to various editions of the Mahabharata? If, somebody can highlight, does it even hold water? Because everywhere when I discuss the Swayamvara Karna Draupadi angle, it always comes, she rejected him. So, she's got to pay. But yeah, it's such a flimsy ground. So somebody can throw light on that.
Yeah, I got kicked out of my own Twitter Spaces for the third time, so I missed the middle part. But if I got a question right, the Mahabharata, the Vyasa Mahabharata does not say that the Draupadi rejected Karna. It is a later interpolation, which is precisely the reason why the Bhandarkar Institute rejected that when they were constituting the critical edition. So I think it might be acceptable to say that, in one of the retellings based on some author's imagination, Draupadi rejected Karna, but the Vyasa Mahabharata has no such mention. I think for whatever reasons this was added, maybe to make Draupadi accountable for whatever reasons, it does her no justice in my mind, and it also attempts to absolve.
One of the other kings.
Yeah.
One of the other kings, Sarang Dhwaj, is called Suta, charioteer. Like one of the other kings who actually participated is called, charioteer, Suta. So it's like, why is she rejecting one suit and not the other suit? That also comes across as a contradiction. So, and in the same sequence, if you go 3-4 shlokas below, then it shows that it says that Karn actually missed. Karn and Shalya missed. So that's what actually some people actually translated as the long-eared Shalya missed. So people just want to say what, as Rupal pointed out, as people want to just say what they want to say. But it is very clear that shlok didn't appear.
Yeah, I think some of these retellings should have a disclaimer at the top that any resemblance to the Vyasa Mahabharata is entirely coincidental and accidental. But so we are coming to the end. I do want to close the spaces with a couple of points. One is thank you all for joining in, and to our speakers for shedding so much of light, and I think things that we had probably not known earlier, and even to our listeners, some of them who asked their questions. So thank you for that. We have done 3 such spaces, and now with the new week and with the new calendar year starting up, I think all of us will get busier than we were in the last few days. So we'll see how often we can do these spaces. In any case, this is also being recorded, and I will share the recording link once it's available. The next point is that we have done 3 spaces with respect to Karn, and I think hopefully we have shed some light to our listeners and helped clear up some myths and misconceptions about him. We do want to cover other topics also. One of the topics that some people have suggested is Yudhishthir, because there are certain myths, misconceptions about him also that have propagated over the years. So we'll take that also. We'll see how to conduct that spaces. If you have suggestions on topics, characters, episodes from the Mahabharata that we could pick up, please do send in your suggestions. You can use the Ask Mahabharata hashtag, so it'll become easier to track. And in any case, thank you all for joining, and please let's also continue the discussion going on Twitter. And with that,